All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neera Tandon, and I am the president of the Center for American Progress, and I'm really thrilled to be moderating this vital conversation today. I really can't think of a more timely moment to gather these incredibly distinguished mayors and leaders. I'm honored to be joined by Newark Mayor Ross Baraka, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego, and Stockton Mayor Michael Tubbs. And I'll say a few more words about them in a minute. But I really wanted to just start by saying that we are gathering at a time where we all as a country, but these leaders in particular, are leading us as we go through a moment of deep pain and anguish for so many Americans. That has come to the fore in the last few weeks, but it is a product of years and decades and really even centuries of unequal and unfair treatment. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many other Black Americans has shed a harsh light on systemic racism that is pervasive in our country. Black people are not safe here, not when they go out for a jog, not when they go out to church, not even when they stay in their own home. And they are too often killed at the hands of police. Right now, our country is suffering from the impact, honestly, of two diseases. For one of them, dozens of vaccines are on trial, medical professionals are working around the clock, and there's a global effort to overcome a common enemy. And still, so many people are suffering and dying. For the other, it's a disease that has riddled our country since birth, and the fix is not clear. And we have had decades in which we have really ignored the plight of Black citizens. So our mayors are here joining us today, and they are really on the front lines of tackling both of these diseases, both of these challenges. And they are truly leading at a time where at the national level, we have a president who is incapable of that. And so we're really fortunate to have these leaders who are able to develop real solutions. And I'm really thrilled that all four of them have been working at the forefront of better relations, developing policing systems that serve the entire communities, not just some, really reform of policing systems. So with that, I really want to get started. I'll do a brief introduction of each of our mayors, and we'll have a conversation about the recent events as well as the coronavirus, because as I said, they are leading in both areas. First, we have Newark Mayor Ross Baraka. Prior to being elected mayor in 2014, he served as a member of the city's municipal council and was principal of Newark Central High School from 2007 to 2013. Next, we have Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. Mayor Bottoms became a mayor of Atlanta in January 2018, having previously served as a judge and a city council member. Our third panelist is Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego. Mayor Gallego took office in March of 2019. Prior to serving as mayor, she served on the Phoenix City Council. And our fourth panelist is Stockton Mayor Michael Tubbs. He became mayor in 2017 and is the city's youngest mayor and its first African-American mayor. Prior to serving as mayor, he served as Stockton City Council member. Just one programming note, we will take questions at the end of this. I'll have a time for Q&A with the council, with the mayors, and then we will take questions from you. In the meantime, please feel free to send any questions you have using the questions box on the right side of your screen. Live captioning is also available at americanprogress.org/live captioning. So I'm just going to get started into the event. And again, really grateful for our mayors participating. For each of the panelists, what I'd really like to start with is to ask you how you have experienced the last several weeks, particularly the last 2 weeks, as you were dealing with the continuing health crisis and the protests around police brutality and systemic racism, how have you as mayors really seen your role? How have you tried to lead? And what's been your experience? And I'll start with you, Mayor Lance Bottoms. Do you want to go to Mayor Lance Bottoms? Can you hear me?
Oh. I can now. I'm going in and out, but I think I can hear you now. I only heard part of the question, but I think it was about the last 2 weeks. And
yes, essentially, how have you dealt with the last 2 weeks, both the protests and addressing police brutality and systemic racism as you're dealing with the virus?
So the last 2 weeks have been extraordinary for so many of us across this country. This is like nothing I've ever experienced in my lifetime, only what I've seen in history books. And I think that is we are in this incredible moment and movement in our nation. And I assume that it is very similar to that of the civil rights movement, but this is happening and being amplified in a way that even the civil rights movement was not, because of social media and our ability to access information. And because we have this ability to instantly see, it gives us really an equal responsibility in so many ways to equally react and respond to what people are calling upon us to do in our communities. And so when President Obama sent out the call to mayors across this nation to convene entities and task force to take a look at policing in our communities, we did it immediately. We had our first meeting on yesterday with an advisory council that's going to look at our use of force policies in our city. And what I anticipate is out of that work will probably be even more commissions and task force to look at all of our policies across the city, just in terms of how we're interacting with our communities, not just as it relates to policing, but even how we are allocating our dollars in our communities. Because what we know is that we either pay on the front end or we either pay on the back end. Meaning, if we are over policing our communities, then we're going to have a heightened response from our communities. So I think it's incumbent, in just in the same way the Obama-Biden administration left the plan for 21st century policing, that we create meaningful and honest and legitimate relationships with our communities so that we can work as partners. I think it's incumbent upon us to continue that work despite the leadership that we now have in place from the White House.
Mayor Baraka?
Yeah, so I'd like to echo, first, thank you for having me. Just want to say hello to mayors up here, Tubbs, Lance Bottoms, good to see you. Mayor Glego, how are you? I just want to echo some of those sentiments, but it's been a difficult few months, not weeks. It's been very difficult few months for us here in these cities, basically on our own, trying to keep our people safe and alive, without any real direction or support in the way that we need it. And so you have to be creative as possible to make sure folks are actually doing what they can to protect their families, particularly since COVID has affected our lives a lot more than it's affected other people's lives. And so we had a specific call in a heightened responsibility, not only to just take care of people, but also to provide sympathy and empathy and care, emotional intelligence for the people of this community. And then this second pandemic, which existed way before COVID, white supremacy and racism has, and all of this is unearthed. I mean, somebody's trying to get our attention. Like, if nobody paying attention now, they really are just, not on this planet. I mean, somebody's trying to get our attention. First, all the inequity was unearthed because of COVID, and then bam, George Floyd is murdered, almost on national TV, symbolic to what happened to Emmett Till, and Emmett Till sparked the whole kind of civil rights movement. And this, because it's not the first time a police officer killed a black man, I just think the heinous nature of it created, and the fact that people had been so fed up, it became a tipping point. And now it's up to us to do something about it. And so we're trying to maintain and create opportunities and space for justice and equality and democracy, at the same time trying to keep people safe and equal and healthy. I'm just concerned, as I'm always concerned, that sometimes we, in this moment, people swoop in and focus us, and we're doing the same thing that Mayor Bottoms talked about, where we are, first of all, we're under a consent decree, so we had to do a change of use of force policy anyway. So we're doing all of those things. We're moving money towards, more money, I should say, towards violence prevention, social work, trauma care, all of those things that help us reduce the violence. The reduction of violence helps us to justify the reduction of police, right? So we have to reduce the violence so we can reduce the number of cops that we need, and so we do that. I'm just worried that people begin to think that racism and white supremacy begins and ends with the police department.
Yeah.
It's deeper than that. It would be like slaves saying, let's just get rid of the overseer. I mean, so at the end of the day, you're still in the same condition you were in. You just don't have people enforcing that. And so we have to, be more thoughtful about our approach to deal with this in a kind of holistic way. But we holding on in the city of Newark. We pushing forward. We praying and we moving.
Excellent. Mayor Gallego?
Thank you. It has been quite a 2 weeks here in Phoenix, Arizona. We have been having robust conversations about the relationship between our police department and our community. This week, the city of Phoenix, we had passed a budget in May, and this week we passed a different budget on a bipartisan basis. The big new expenditure was for an Office of Accountability and Transparency for our police department. I don't know that that would have been possible a month ago, that we on a bipartisan basis would say this is something we are going to take seriously, and it is our largest new expenditure. Our police department has been looking at use of force alongside our community and has already made, just this week, some significant changes, and we have a commitment with our community that will continue. It's certainly an issue that has been at the forefront my entire time as mayor. I'm a fairly new mayor, elected in 2019, and it's been an eventful time, but nothing like the last 2 weeks. What gives me hope is that we've been having these conversations in Phoenix for quite a while, but it became a much broader conversation. Now I have folks, the leaders of the business community, reaching out to me and saying, what can we do to fight racism? Those were conversations that we didn't have as often as we needed to before. If you look at our peaceful protests in the city of Phoenix, it is our whole community out there. It is people of all ages and backgrounds. And that gives me the confidence to say that this community will support our elected officials and partner with our elected officials as we make real change. These conversations happen as we recover from, well, we're not recovering from COVID-19. We have hit so many of the records you don't want to be hitting for COVID-19. From my perspective, we opened too much too early, and so our hospitals are really struggling. The state just activated the emergency plan for hospitals this week. We are setting all sorts of records of the type you do not want to have. One thing that I do really want to clarify is that our researchers at Arizona State University have been looking at the trends, and they do not believe it is a result of the protests. There's certainly some cases spreading, but if you look at where COVID is increasing in our community, it really correlates with lifting of the stay-at-home order and some challenges we are having with our long-term care facilities and anywhere people are living closely together. But I come to you as a mayor with a healthcare system that is stressed right now, and I am very worried about the virus and its impact on our community.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego. Mayor Tubbs, how's the last 2 weeks been for you? And then I'm going to get into the particular areas of leadership you've all shown on policing, criminal justice, and systemic racism issues.
Well, first, let me just say I love you. To all the mayors on here, it's been a difficult year for sure, particularly the last 2 weeks and months. And I think to the points raised by everyone else on the panel, what's been most interesting for me in the last 2 weeks and the past kind of several months has been, as Mayor Baraka says, brought to the surface what's been ubiquitous and treated as normal, which is the savage
Right.
inequalities and our structural violence that leads to people of color, Black folks being most likely to be essential workers, and then also having all the comorbidities that make them most likely to die from a pandemic. And then you couple that up with the George Floyd lynching. And I think for me, the last 2 weeks, I've been struggling with sort of reconciling the identities I now hold as a father of a 7-month-old Black son, as a mayor of a city who's in charge of working with the police department and with the community, and as a 29-year-old Black man whose entire adulthood has been marked by Oscar Grant, freshman year in college, Trayvon Martin, senior year in college, Troy Davis, um, Sandra Bland in 2014 while city council member protesting Michael Brown. So it's a bit of fatigue as well. It's like, here we go again. And I know, just given the 400 years of our history, this is just a moment of time, but I think like the other mayors, I'm incredibly inspired to see it globalized. You had 15,000 people marching in Amsterdam. You have the Democratic caucus coming out with a set of policing reforms. And I think in Stockton's case, we've been lucky in that we've taken this issue seriously for the past several years, which is why so we have relationship with folks who are protesting. We have relationships with folks who are angry and have been working to improve our police department. So last year we led the state in the decline in use of force shootings and things of that sort. So to answer your question, the last 2 weeks have been very, very difficult in really searching for A, the right words, and B, the right actions that really convey sort of the seriousness of this moment, but also capitalize the opportunity, as the mayor said, to actually do the things we've been needing more help in doing and pushing some of our colleagues and other systems along.
So I would love to just follow up on that last point, because you've had a big reduction in some critical statistics in Stockton. Could you really just share with us what the change in policies have been, and then what results you've seen? And I think, there's obviously multiple models, but we have two kind of models of police systems. One is ones that work more with the community, and ones that have been working on top of the community to police the community versus serve a community. And I think one of the things that gets lost is that the actual service model, it has been more effective across the board, and Stockton is a great example of that. So I'd love it if you could just share. I mean, we're fortunate to have mayors who all have reforms that they've been implementing, but I'd love for you to just talk about the experience of Stockton and the statistics that the statistical changes and what that's really meant in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm blessed to have a progressive, forward-thinking police chief who's a white man who's been a police officer for the past 29 years. But before there were hashtags, my first moment on city council in 2013, his first year as police chief said, let's figure out a way to transform what it means to be a police officer in this community. So a lot of things in the 8 that can't wait in terms of changing use of force, banning chokeholds, we did that in 2014. We put body cameras on our officers in 2014. We were part of the National Trust Initiative, which has really forced us to have tough conversations. So our police chief over the past 4 years has had an open door policy for anyone who has ever had a use of force incident, whether justified or unjustified, with Stockton PD before his time or during his time. He meets with the family and listens. He's done reconciliation tours where he's apologized for the atrocities of committed by our police department in the past. He's talked about how in the 30s, Stockton PD bombed a thriving Filipino neighborhood. He went to the Filipino community and apologized for that in uniform. He went to Black churches and said, I understand that policing started with slave patrols, and policings were used to stop civil rights, and police were used to watch lynchings. And I apologize for that. And I think those things have moved the needle a long way to build. I mean, there's always going to be distrust, but build more trust in that at least he gets it, and he gets that there's work to do. On the policy side, since 2014, all of our officers have been trained, not just one time, but ongoing, in procedural justice and implicit bias. In fact, our officers, although not perfect, now go and train other police departments on what does it mean to be procedurally just, understanding that the issue isn't that people of color have issues with the law. People of color have issues with the enforcement of the law unequally. And that to be a police officer, you have to be seen as procedurally just, that you're treating everyone the same for infractions. So I think it's just been an iterative work in progress. We have community members who have been victims of police brutality, who have family members who have been murdered by police, who are helping inform policy. And it's also just a bunch of tough conversations. And then the last thing I will say is, since 2016, myself and the police chief have been both in unison saying, cops can't be everything. The issue is that we want cops to be social workers and jobs and therapists and clinicians. Law enforcement should be law enforcement. Let's figure out how to hire more social workers. Let's figure out how to create better schools. Let's figure out how to create more jobs, because anytime you expect one person, one entity that's not trained to do all those things, you're always going to be frustrated. You're always going to be upset. And you're always going to be angry because they're not designed to do that work. So we've been working on figuring out partnerships with our school district and county so that our cops aren't the only first responders for every social ill in our city.
And what numbers have you seen decline? You've seen.
Yeah, let me answer your question. So we led the state in decline of use of force shootings. We also have seen a 40% reduction in homicides and gun violence. That's been sustained for the last 2 years, and it's looking like it might be even lower this year, which is incredible because Stockton historically has been double the state average in homicides. So we've become a safer community while also being a more to your point, policing as a public service, really focusing on actual threats to safety, actual threats to life, and I think that's gone a long way.
And Mayor Lance Bottoms, I wanted to just ask you, Atlanta is a big city that has also had more reforms and had better relations than other big cities. What are the ways you're thinking of changing going forward? I'd love for you to talk about the changes you've made, but also any changes you're thinking going forward. And there's been a big debate about moving some activities that are done by police related to mental health and substance abuse. In a sense, we over police problems versus actually try to address those problems from a non-police public health perspective or other perspectives. So I'd love for you to talk about your experiences, what you're doing, and how you see policing going forward.
So just first of all, I just again want to thank you for convening this panel, because listening to Mayor Tubbs and the other mayors is still so much that we can learn and pick up from each other. And so I'm making sure that I'm taking notes so I can do some follow-ups as well. So this is as much about educating me as it is for the public. So I appreciate that. But in Atlanta, we began in earnest to look at criminal justice reform several years ago, and it's taken different forms. So part of what we are doing in our city, we allow inmates who are transitioning out of the state prison system to go out during the day, work as a part of our workforce in our watershed department, our public works department, transition into full-time jobs so that when they are done with their sentences, that they can transition into full-time jobs with benefits. And it has been so heartwarming to have conversations with many of the men who are in this program and to hear them relay how meaningful it is for their families. Because part of my background is my father was incarcerated at some point. So I know how devastating that can be on families. But the other thing that we're doing is we eliminated cash bail bonds in the city of Atlanta. And what that's meant, if you get stopped for a broken taillight, if you had $200 in your pocket, you could pay it in an hour and you'd be back out on the street. If you didn't have it, then you might end up staying in our jail for weeks or months at a time. So we eliminated that. We ended our relationship with ICE. We had a contract worth millions of dollars a year to house ICE detainees, and we ended that during the family separation crisis that we saw at the border. So it allowed us an opportunity to really reimagine what this 400,000 plus square foot physical jail facility could be, and how it could really we could navigate from this model of mass incarceration into this model of equity, health, and wellness with a physical place in our community that people could come to. And with this year's budget, we moved over 60% of our corrections budget. We are passing our budget in the next week or so, but we have moved our corrections budget over into the mayor's office of constituent services so that we can begin to reallocate this money that we were using towards incarceration to be able to put it into things that help improve our community, whether it's as simple as sending people out to help pick up trash in the community, or something more something a bit more robust, other programmatic things in our communities. And it really is about reimagining how we interact with our communities. And going forward, you know, what we're seeing, as Mayor Tubbs said, our police department is far from perfect. But there are some great things that are happening in terms of interaction with our police officers, with our kids. We have an At Promise Youth Center in Atlanta. We are in the process of building 2 more. Part of the requirement in that center is that our police recruits go in weekly. They spend time with our kids. They're working alongside our kids, helping to mentor our kids, and they're learning just as much from our kids as our kids are learning from them to create some impactful relationships. And the list goes on, but again, the opportunity just to hear what's happening in other cities and how we really are approaching our relationship with our police and our communities is incredibly important, because we don't have all of the answers in one city. And so many times we get it right and so many times we get it wrong. But the great thing about Atlanta is this opportunity to keep trying again and again. And we have this rich legacy of civil rights in our city. And so I think that we have the benefit of having this blueprint of what change should look like right at our fingertips that many other cities don't have.
That's fantastic. Mayor Baraka, and thank you so much for your words, Mayor Lance Bottoms. I would love to just ask Mayor Baraka, Newark has been under a consent decree, but there have been significant reforms as part of that process as well, and accountability in other areas. And I'd love if you could share that and the changes that have already been made, additional changes you're thinking about, and also just what those changes have meant for the communities that within Newark.
So when I came into office, I immediately had to sign the consent decree. So the good thing about it is that we weren't adverse to that. We weren't like trying to fight the consent decree. We welcomed it. In fact, we partnered. We stood up a civilian complaint review board that we're now in the state Supreme Court fighting to keep now. Even though the consent decree said you have to have civilian oversight, so we established one. I guess we established one a little bit more advanced than they wanted us to. So we have use of force training now. All the policy use of force has changed. Implicit bias training. All of the things that Mayor Tubbs talked about. These things happen because we're mandated to do it in the city. We had to change policy, and they have to do. We have de-escalation training. All those things happen, and with the help of Equal Justice and New Community Street Team, which is our street organizations, and Equal Justice is a national organization. They do these trauma circles with police and community around the city, and they talk very frankly about issues that people have in the community. And sometimes those it goes from not just talking about the issues they have with police, they start telling police about other issues they have. My garbage didn't picked up. This didn't happen. That didn't happen. The light is out right here. So they wind up taking notes and have to send it to us and say, listen, this is not our job, but the light is out on such and such street. And that has become incredibly important. And then we established what we call a citizen clergy. Between the clergy and citizens, we train residents of our community under police practices, the law, the policy, everything that's going on, so they know. And we give them cars. We paint a old police car yellow, put citizen clergy on to give them an opportunity to come to crime scenes to help us de-escalate situations that have the potential to become crazy. We use the community in many ways to help change the relationship between the police and the community. And our complaints against the police department are down 80%,
Wow.
which is huge based on when we first started, right? And like the mayor said, we have a reduction of homicides since 2013. So when I took office in 2013, we had 116, 117 homicides. Last year, we had 51. So 51 is too many, but it's certainly a lot less than 116. So we have actually been arresting less people and seeing crime go in the opposite direction because of, I think, all the other kind of social changes that takes place. I think we have to deal with the issue of violence. And that's the most important thing because the people in our community, so this kind of, idea that we need to get rid of the police, my grandmother, my mother won't go for it because, I can't sell it in my neighborhood. And that's the policies that I support or policies I can sell to my mama and grandmama. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, we have to do something about the violence, which is why we begin to put money and resources and alternative ways to diffuse violence, to deal with violence, whether it's social work, mental health, other kind of opportunities to give people de-escalation, conflict resolution. All of those things are necessary in it. And then going forward, we're planning on, so all of these things that the police already hire social workers now. So our police department in their own budget already hire social workers. They put them in the what we call the Shawty Brock Women's Resource Center. We hire social workers. What we want to do is bring everybody under the Office of Violence Prevention and begin to put all of the folks under there and all of the community organizations, give them an opportunity to have a constant stream of funding so they can do the work that they do in the community in a more robust and expanded way. So we're taking 5% of the city's police budget to be able to do that, and we're going to make it the law. So I know there's a lot of people saying, I'm going to take $1 million away from the police, but you have to do it and codify it as law because you're not going to be there forever. And somebody can come behind you and just change it. So that's what we're trying to do.
That's excellent. I really just wanted to highlight, I think what you're illustrating, and everyone's illustrating, I'll come to Mayor Gallego, but just really to put a point on it, violence, these strategies actually lead to violence reduction, which leads to greater community safety. I mean, I think there's been this really false choice developed that you have to have police strategies that are just really, almost militaristic in order to have safety. And it's really quite the opposite. And, just the data you're all sharing is really helpful to make the point that having police and other forces in the community, social workers, clergy, others, serving people in a way that reduces violence is a way that we actually get safer. So I just wanted to highlight that point. And then Mayor Gallego, I'd love for you to talk about some of the strategies that I know you're new, you came in 2019, but even as you've come in, there have been reforms put forward. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Absolutely. So during my time as mayor, we have done full deployment to body cameras to all of our officers out in the community, and I think that's an important message for building trust. I also launched a program with my council colleagues this year to embed clinicians with our police department. A lot of the cases that have been most difficult for us in Phoenix have had a mental health component, and even our officers agree that we need to make changes in that area. One officer told us people call 911 when they're in crisis because they do not know who else to call. So we've tried to make sure that there are mental health resources available. And traditionally, the way government works in Arizona, we are not the public health authority at the city of Phoenix. It's not a city function. Mental health is not a city function. But it's been so intertwined with everything our fire and police departments have been doing that we've decided to, as much as possible, not point a finger at another branch of government and say it's their fault, and just try to step up and look for solutions. We've been able to have really good success with embedding clinicians with our department and really also at our 911 call center so that we can get people the appropriate resources, and that's been very successful. We've also been putting a lot of investment into our crisis intervention team, officers who are highly trained at helping people in crisis. One of my really inspiring moments as mayor was going out with some officers on our crisis intervention team. There was a mother who'd called in, military veteran with a firearm. She was heartbroken. She was facing addiction, and her son had told her, "I never want to see you again. I'm done with you." I don't know what it's like to be in her shoes, but I'm a mother, and I know how I would feel if my son said, "I don't want to see you again. I don't want to be part of your life." I mean, heartbreaking. Our officers spent time with her, developed a relationship, found things they had in common, and gave her a sense of hope. It went from a very dangerous feeling situation with a woman with a firearm to ending up with her accepting services, seeing a path forward. So I felt like I got to witness an officer save a life without any use of force. We can have clinicians supporting that, but when there are firearms involved, I think there does need to be police officer involved. So that's sort of what our role model has been for how we want to move forward in the city of Phoenix. We've had good success with programs similar to some that my colleagues have mentioned. When I was elected to the council, we had some significant challenges with taking away people's driver's licenses if they couldn't pay their fees. And I'm a proud supporter of public transit, but Phoenix is still a city where if you don't have a car and you lose your license, it can really hurt your economic prospects. So if you couldn't pay your tickets when you had a job in a car, it wasn't leading to success when we took that away from people. And that reform has helped thousands of people in our community. We've heard from one woman who said, "I was in a domestic violence situation, but I felt like I couldn't leave because I didn't have a driver's license." And then the program helped her get into a safer situation. We've had good success with banning the box, and we have very successful city employees who had a felony at one point in their life, but had so much to offer. And once we looked at our employment policies, we found that we could win as an employer and provide needed employment to people in our community. So we've had, I think, some very successful policies, and we know we're not done. We have to keep having these conversations and doing more, but I think it's been an important year at the City of Phoenix.
Great. As everyone's been dealing with the last few weeks of heightened attention to the problems, honestly, mayors have been dealing with a long time, which is policing systems, police brutality, systemic racism, and other issues. You've also had to deal with a pandemic, and that is often really coming on your shoulders as leaders. So I'd love to just ask you each. I'll start with you, Mayor Lance Bottoms. You're in a unique situation in that the state you're in has been very prescriptive around a reopening. And so, and I know that you have perhaps a different perspective on reopening. So I'd love for you to share your views on like safety, literal health safety of Atlanta's as you're in the state of Georgia with a governor who really pushed reopening very aggressively, and I'll just say at a time where the data really pointed in an alternative direction.
So we just had to create a parallel path in Atlanta, and there's been no playbook, at least that was left for me on as mayor, how you deal with the pandemic, and certainly not one on how you deal with a transitional movement like we're seeing in this country. And I think for so many mayors, it has just been this opportunity for us to lead with our head and heart. So when I look at our numbers in Georgia with COVID-19, the reality is that 80% of our hospitalizations in our state were were Black and brown people in our state. And for me, it really was this moment that in good conscience, I couldn't remain silent about our reopening. That being said, I said at the beginning of the reopening in Georgia, I wanted to be wrong because I knew if the governor was right, more people would die. And we are somewhere in the middle, whereas we were seeing increases of around 25 to 30% in terms of people testing positive. Those increases are now around 8 to 10%. So a lot better, but it's still not great because we're still seeing an increase in the people dying and the rate of infections, and those numbers are starting to tick up a bit. But what we did in Atlanta, we created an advisory council comprised of people from the corporate community, small business owners, colleges, universities, et cetera, to create a framework for the city of Atlanta. So it's a 5-phased approach. And to the extent that our numbers are still down in Atlanta, I believe in large part it's because many of our larger employers, because we're home to 26 Fortune 500 companies in Atlanta, they haven't opened back up their campuses. So you have thousands upon thousands of people who may go in and out of, I'll just say, the Coca-Cola building every day. Well, when Coca-Cola doesn't open back up, that certainly helps with us not having people coming together in mass groups. And we'll see what happens on the other side of the mass gatherings too. So we were still waiting on numbers from the Memorial Day weekend. And with the mass gatherings, we've taken testing into some of these highly populated areas to encourage people to get tested, and just asking people get tested. I got tested after I participated in one of the demonstrations. Thankfully, my test came back negative, but I think we've got to continue to encourage people to do that and continue to make decisions that are best for our communities, because nobody knows their community better than the mayor knows their community. And I remember the first time I met Vice President Biden, him saying, you know, being on city council was harder than being vice president. And I was shocked to hear him say that. And I said, why? And he said, because everybody knows where you live. And that's the reality of being a mayor. And even in this time period, knowing where you live means that, at least in my case, protesters even show up at your house sometimes. So we're just trying to figure it out as we go and make decisions that we know are best for our communities. And I think in Atlanta, those decisions are helping us to save lives.
And Mayor Baraka, I wanted to just follow up on the issue mentioned by Mayor Lance Bottoms on the disproportionate impact on communities of color that the virus has had, and any strategies or thoughts you have about how to address those issues or redress that, whether it's more resources to hospitals that are serving communities of color, changing the way the health system is dealing with these issues, and anything you'd like to share about how you're tackling the virus.
Well, so the only thing we can do now is mitigate those things. Some of those things can't be fixed in the middle of COVID. We're going to have to restructure, in my mind, the entire healthcare system, our access to healthcare, period, access to quality food in our community, decent housing that 75% of the people in Newark rent. So what's been happening is that when people get COVID in Newark, they're giving it to their family, right? And they rent, and they're in small apartments. So that's basically been the case. And so what we have to do is apply more support, or give more support to these hospitals in these areas to make sure that they have what we need. Do some more mobile testing. Go into areas where folks are not going to come out and get tested. You have to go to these communities. When people have these events, we have an information and education committee. So we no longer use the police anymore. We send folks out with flyers, with information.
Mm.
And now we're going to set up testing. So you out there in a bunch, while you hanging out, come get tested. Get a mask, get flyers. So it's basically education and information that you have to use in these communities that don't have access, who are not watching CNN, they're not watching Fauci, don't even know who he is. They're not even watching my reports that I do daily. They're not watching any of this. So they have very little information. And so we have to take the information to them. And I think that's the only way to really address or mitigate some of this stuff to keep these people safe and let them know, especially when you open it up, you got to tell people how to stay safe in a place that's concerned more about everything else than your health. And as the state of New Jersey opens up, there are places in New Jersey that do not have as many cases as Newark and do not have as many deaths as Newark because they're just different demographically than we are. And so when the governor says this is what we're going to do for the state, it's not one size fits all. It may be beneficial to everybody else, but it's hurtful to us in cities like Newark.
Got it. That's a really critical point. Mayor Gallego, I wanted to just, and we'll be taking questions from the audience just in another minute. I'll go to Mayor Gallego about your experience and what you're doing to address the health needs of your community, particularly, again, in a state like Arizona, which is seeing a surge in cases. It reopened kind of more radically than other states and has seen a large surge and is now, has the hospital system incredibly stressed. And I wanted to ask you, when you have a governor who's sending a very different message than you are, and yet you have a big population center in Arizona, how are you handling that? What advice do you give to people? What are your strategies on that issue? And then I'll come to Mayor Tubbs in just afterwards.
Mayors really led the effort to fight COVID-19 in Arizona. Early on, I joined with Mayor Coral Evans, who represents the largest city in northern Arizona, and Mayor Regino Romero, who represents the largest city in southern Arizona. We did executive orders and implemented social distancing, moving restaurants to takeouts, shutting down bars, different safety measures, which we have data from our university showing did slow the spread. The governor followed us and eventually went to a statewide order and then a stay-at-home order. Mayors worked together to really talk about what needed to be in the stay-at-home order. Originally, the list of businesses considered essential in Arizona was quite broad and included things such as nail salons, where researchers have shown that there's pretty significant transmission rates. If you looked at communities with good contact tracing, we've seen transmission linked to some of those personal services, leading to some of the regional outbreaks. So again, I was proud to work with other mayors to send a strong message of safety. When the governor lifted his stay-at-home order, he preempted mayors and cities from doing our own precautions. So you will see raging nightclub parties in Arizona, and that is not what the CDC recommends. They recommended gradual reopening and really looking at more essential services. I'm trying to use whatever I can as a bully pulpit to remind people, if you can stay home, please do. We were talking about masking as much as possible and continue to have a debate with our state. When we went to required masks at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, which the city operates, we had legislators saying that this was tyranny. I've not, I think, been a hugely nationally prominent mayor, and it was really eye-opening for me when I would get from all over the country people saying she's the Gestapo, or some pretty rough things. I am Jewish, and I think I've been talking with some other Jewish mayors where there's been all this weird Nazi terminology thrown at us, and we're talking about
Jewish governors.
Right, Jewish governors as well, and we're talking about how not helpful that is in our community. I am trying to work as closely with our healthcare leaders to put good data out there and help people get information about what they can do to stay safe. We in Phoenix are sort of, in a weird way, proud of our heat and feel that it is very tough and nothing can withstand it. And I think there were many people in this community who thought because flu tends to decline dramatically during our summer, that we didn't have to worry. But if you look at our hospitalization numbers and critical life-saving equipment that is at capacity right now, summer was not a cure-all. We are unfortunately looking like we are in exponential growth right now. So I'm asking my residents to take this seriously. If you are tired of staying home and frustrated, if you can think about those in your life who are most vulnerable, whether it's your grandmother or your brother who's facing cancer, maybe that will help you realize how important it is to take this seriously, because it is deadly and we have already lost too many.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I do think it's like a great irony that we have all this call for states' rights, but then governors preempt mayors and their ability to actually, they know their communities really well. Mayor Tubbs, I'd love to just ask you finally, how are you handling the virus? California has handled the virus differently than, say, Arizona. But how are you seeing the particular stresses of the virus, and any ideas for us on best ways to address it?
I'm laughing because I've been called on to be a health professional in the past couple months, and I'm like, biology was my worst subject. I wish I paid a little bit more attention. In terms of California, I think we're lucky that Gavin Newsom's our governor, and he's really laid the way and provided a lot of political cover. So the tension in my community is between us and the county. Stockton's the county seat. Stockton's the most diverse city in this country, so definitely in this county, and we're surrounded by towns that are a little more homogenous and don't have a lot of people who are most likely to die from COVID-19 or are essential workers. In fact, our essential workers go work in the fields, some of the surrounding county cities in the county. And I say that because we've been having a very vocal fight around sort of CARES Act funding. $133 million of CARES Act funding went directly to our county. We are 40% of the county, 46% of the population of COVID cases, and receive $0 from the county to address the crisis, while everyone's coming to me and saying, Mayor Tubbs, do this, do this, do this. Additionally, we've been opening up gradually. And as I've shared several times, I'm not the public health officer, but our public health officer has said publicly that she's scared to say you have to wear a mask in public because of death threats and because of threats to our safety and security. So I put it on my agenda for the council on Monday or Tuesday, and the council voted 6-1 against an ordinance to wear a mask. I'm citing science that doesn't exist, citing aware public health officers, citing that people, while mind you, when we meet, everyone's wearing masks. So that's some of the frustrating things, and I think it starts at the top with just the amount of misinformation from the presidency, which makes it easier and gives people cover to do things that are reckless and not in the best interest of public health. So I've been sounding the alarm, saying, listen, if you guys stay open, this is how we have to do it. And then the last thing I think what we've been doing in Stockton is trying to fill in the gap. So from the first time COVID hit, we set up a food delivery program to seniors before the state did. On Mother's Day, we gave 125 single mothers $500 to just do what they needed to do to take care of themselves and their children. We've been working with our homeless shelters and figure out different ways to deliver services. Just doing what we can to protect the most vulnerable, because we know in times of pandemic, when everyone's hit, those who were hit hardest before are definitely going to be hit even harder during a hard time for everyone. So definitely not perfect, definitely no new ideas, but wash your hands, stay at home unless it's essential, and wear a mask when you go out in public. You can take it off as soon as you get in the car, but when you're out in public, when you're protesting, whatever, wear a mask, because we without the vaccine, the virus will continue to spread. It doesn't care about our feelings, it doesn't care about the weather, it doesn't care about how tired we are. It's a virus and it's real, and we have to mitigate it and move into this new normal.
I mean, the thing that's the greatest challenge, you just referencing the masks and how the science on masks is really just established, essentially, that wearing masks is really vital. And yet we live in a country where the president sends a message that you don't really need to wear a mask, not just by what he does every day. And I just want to say how, just to say for a minute, that makes all of your jobs harder, right? Because people don't wear masks and they have virus outbreaks. That happens in Phoenix and Atlanta and Stockton and Newark, and it becomes a problem for mayors to deal with. And it's just, I mean, as other countries deal with it, we're unique in the world. I mean, Brazil is another example, but unique amongst kind of rational countries, seemingly rational countries, and basically eschewing the basic things like masks and making masks a political fight instead of just a basic health issue. But enough of my memorializing. I would love to get to questions. We have a question from Robin Reck, which is reforming, rethinking, or redesigning the police is just one step. What are other areas that you've been thinking through in solving these challenges that disproportionately hit communities of color? So it's really a question about how, I think the question really is driving towards the systemic institutions, systemic racism we see embedded in institutions. And as you're thinking through your budgets, are you redirecting resources not just to mental health services and others, but education, job training, resources to build assets and essentially capabilities in communities of color? So I'll start with Mayor Baraka. Let's start with Mayor Baraka and do a quick round if we can.
Sure. I mean, all of those things are important. In fact, they help us to reduce crime, better housing, better education. It just takes a longer period of time. And so we are trying to spend more money in those areas. You know, what's interesting is that the city's budgets are not as big and huge as people expect them or think they are. And most of the cost is personnel. The more people you have, the more money you spend it. And so we rely heavily on the federal and state government to help subsidize some of the work that we're doing around housing, around other issues, even the private sector, just putting local ordinances together to force them to deliver services to us that we need in order for them to get business done in our community. But specifically, things that we're trying to work on: land banking, trying to create public and affordable housing for people in the city, land trusts that are important, creating opportunities where anchor institutions have to hire local residents and they have to invest in local businesses that spend their money locally with the businesses here in our community. We call it Hire, Buy, Live in the city of Newark, spending more money on trying to give early childhood folks access to more opportunity in school, to get them started in school early, and expanding our summer program to be year round and put thousands of more kids to work at more meaningful jobs that set them up for careers and opportunity than just cleaning up a vacant lot, right? So there's a myriad of things that we try to spend our money and resources on and get other people to help us with that. There's some systemic changes that I think need to happen. I think that's a discussion that we also need to get into as well.
Mayor Gallego, you had your hand up?
As we have tried to recover from COVID-19, we're really trying to be intentional in the city of Phoenix about addressing equity concerns. So we have a very significant small business aid program, and it's for businesses that are in low-income census tracts. We know that communities of color have been hit harder by this, and that they have not had the access to traditional banking institutions and others that would have helped them get federal aid. So we're trying to say we want to target those who have been hit the hardest. We also have a multi-million-dollar program for our refugee community, which again has struggled to get access to the traditional aid programs, many of which have extensive forms, and you have to document income and prove you were impacted by COVID-19. So we're developing programs that are only for our refugee community so that they get that much needed aid. We have a very diverse city and have been very welcoming to refugees, and they have given back to us, whether it's powering our airport or even designing one of our police substations. We have a significant Iraqi community here, including many people who translated for our troops when they were in Iraq and saved American lives. And so I hope people will say the city of Phoenix is stepping up for those who stepped up for us. We also have one of the largest programs to support our arts and culture institutions through COVID-19 in the country, trying to get grants out to artists who create a great city, our great cultural institutions that really interrupted their prime season to help us stay at home and slow the spread of COVID-19. And we're trying to be very intentional about putting that information in multiple languages. And we've challenged our Arts and Culture Commission to get it out to the full diversity of our community. So we hope as we recover from COVID-19, we're putting in programs that will address those equity issues over the long term. We don't want to wait and say we're in one crisis, we can't address another. And so hopefully we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Great. Mayor Lance Bottoms, as you're thinking through the rebuilding effort, I also wanted to ask you, and also obviously these issues around police brutality, they've raised systemic racism issues. Mayors, all of the mayors have talked about investing in different alternatives to policing to solve particular problems, but it's also about ensuring that all communities have the resources they need to actually thrive. And so I just wonder if you were thinking about how you're allocating resources across the budget into the future.
Sure, and something that's right at my fingertips, because we're in the midst of getting our budget approved, is our budget book. And this is a pretty big book.
It's a pretty big book.
For people who live and breathe municipal government, you know, there's an understanding and a recognition that it's a complex process and document. And there's so many things that are reflected in here, but so many things that are not. So for example, City of Atlanta, we don't control our public schools. So you will not see set aside money in here, particularly for our public schools, something that people have certainly been crying out for because it's an independently elected body. You won't see what we are setting aside in large part for affordable housing in our city, because that's the purview of our housing authority, which is not reflected in here. And you also won't see a project that we have with our corporate community and our Atlanta Technical College called the Center for Workforce Innovation, where we are looking to train people for jobs at Delta Airlines as mechanics, paying $100,000 plus a year, for linemen with Georgia Power, as plumbers with the Home Depot, as coders with Truist, and the list goes on. And so there's so many things that we have that we are working on in conjunction to not just how we allocate our city dollars, but how we maximize the partnerships that we have available to us in Atlanta. And what I like to say is that we combine compassion and commerce in our city. We're very fortunate in our city with the Fortune 500 companies who are based here, that they are invested in a very meaningful way, even with Arthur Blank and the Blank Foundation, owner of the Atlanta Falcons on our city's west side. There is a huge, robust job training program through an entity called the Westside Future Fund, a nonprofit entity that works in conjunction with the city and with our nonprofit community to make sure that people have the wraparound services they need. So if they need to get a GED, or if they are looking for affordable housing, if they're looking for job training, even if they are looking to continue their education beyond high school, that those resources are at their fingertips. And so we continue to be creative in Atlanta and think outside the box. And I just encourage people, as people are becoming more interested and more informed about how their cities are allocating their dollars, that they don't just stop at the Instagram posts or the social media headline, that they really do educate themselves and become more informed so you can get a complete picture of what's happening in our cities. And there's so much happening, not just in Atlanta, but across this country. And I think it's great that people are interested in what's happening in our cities. But I think the key to success for us to be able to do the work is for us to work together and not necessarily work at each other. And I love what Mayor Baraka said. If he can't sell it to his mother and his grandmother, It's not going to fly for me. It's my mother's Saturday bridge club meeting. I think about what does this mean to her? If I start talking about equity, somebody's going to say, well, what exactly does that mean? But if I talk about how much their power bill is and the reason that we need to take a look at having solar panels in many of our underserved communities who may not even speak in the language of climate change and the whole nine, but they know what a high power bill means. That's a true test of how our messages are resonating with our communities, how it feels on the ground. And I just encourage people, let your elected officials know what you care about. It doesn't have to be in the fancy municipal government speak language. Just continue to push it out to us what you care about, because if we don't hear from you and we don't know what's at issue in our communities, there's no way we can begin to try and change it.
Fantastic. And Mayor Tubbs, I'd just like to end with you on you've been doing a lot of innovations and that build on the innovations we've been hearing all throughout. But I just love as we close the program, your final thoughts on what we can do to make systemic changes that we ensure that all communities, particularly Black communities, Black and Brown communities, are getting the real, we're redressing the systematic ways they've been treated unequally for decades.
Yeah, I think part of it is, as we've heard from the mayors, the folks on the front line, we're doing everything we can to fill in gaps. I mean, in Stockton, we've been piloting a basic income. We're extending it through COVID. We have a scholarship program where every single senior from our largest school district is guaranteed a scholarship to a 2-year, 4-year trade school. But none of those things are necessary but not sufficient. So I think to the points raised earlier, we're really talking about structural violence, which is like the avoidable impairment of basic human needs. And city government's not equipped to handle that. That's a national policy conversation. And I think what we're seeing with the civil unrest is that people are tired of police violence, but they're tired of the violence of poverty. They're tired of the violence of not being able to afford housing. They're tired of the violence of going to terrible schools. They're tired of the violence of not having access to healthcare. So this moment, we really have to just reimagine our social contract, and it should include things like an income floor for people. It should include things like healthcare. It should include things like the ability to afford housing. And I think those things are what this moment dictates and requires, because, and the mayors, we would love to do those things. We just can't. Our budgets aren't equipped to do for that. Our budgets are police, transportation, garbage, snow in cities like Newark, and some youth activities. But we don't have the budgets, the money. So we have to have this conversation with the school districts, with the county board of supervisors, but also just as from the federal government as a framework, a new deal, if you will, for the 21st century in recognition of what COVID-19 and George Floyd has taught us.
I cannot think of a better way to end this program than reimagining the social contract with the challenges we've seen. Perhaps that is an opportunity to actually do the profound changes we need to address these things. And I'm grateful for the leadership of mayors in these fights, but know that we need national leaders as well. I want to thank each one of you for being part of this. I think this conversation was so incredibly helpful and important in this moment, and really grateful for your leadership across the challenges you're seeing. Thank you so much.
Y'all be